I'd now like to introduce our keynote speaker for tonight, Jonathan Turley. Turley holds the Shapiro Chair of Public Interest Law for the George Washington University Law School. He has served as counsel in some of the most notable cases of the last 2 decades, including representing members of Congress, judges, whistleblowers, 5 attorneys general, celebrities, accused spies and terrorists, journalists, protesters, and workers at the secret facility, Area 51. Turley has testified before Congress more than 100 times, including during the impeachment hearings of Presidents Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, and Joe Biden. He's written for the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, the Los Angeles Times, and USA Today. Called the Dean of Legal Analysts by the Washington Post, Turley has spent decades grappling with legal, economic, and political crises. The host of one of the top legal opinion blogs, Turley has worked as a legal analyst for CBS, NBC, BBC, and Fox. Finally, I'd like to add that Turley has been an unwavering champion of free speech on campus, in America, and across the globe. His book, The Indispensable Right, Free Speech in an Age of Rage, blends history, art, natural law, psychology, and inspiring stories of America's free speech champions in an incredible defense of our inalienable expressive rights. We have copies of The Indispensable Right here, and I hope you'll all be able to pick up a copy. With that, please join me in welcoming Professor Jonathan Turley.
Thank you, Harrington, and thank you all for the pleasure to be able to talk with you today. Thank you for the kindness you've shown me, my wife, Leslie, my mother-in-law, Suzanne, who are here today. The Alumni Alliance is something perhaps so unique that you can't understand it if you're part of it. For those of us who have come from outside, this is an amazing organization. At a time when free speech is under attack, we're losing ground in some areas. There are some shining points of hope. This is one of them. It's an amazing organization. I commend you for what you've been able to accomplish here, and it's a credit to UNC. So thank you very much. I'm here to talk about free speech in 30 minutes, about 800 years of free speech in about 30 minutes. And so, as Henry VIII told Anne Boleyn, "Fear not, I shall not keep you long." It's a subject that is overwhelming because it goes to the very history of humanity. And indeed, it took me 30 years to write this book. I have another book coming out that many of you were kind enough to vote on the possible title. And I want to say, after that extraordinary effort, that you helped me not at all. This afternoon, when I had the board vote, they were overwhelmingly in favor of one title, and I thought I had resolved it. And then I brought it to you, and the exact same number picked another title. So I am back where I started, so thank you. But that book deals with the continuation of this book, but it looks at democracy and whether American democracy can survive in the 21st century. This book took me 30 years because I didn't want to just write another book on free speech. I wanted to try to find out why we are struggling after so many centuries with free speech. And finally, my editor, who's a wonderful man at Simon & Schuster, Bob Messenger, who used to be the top editor at Wall Street Journal, called me and he said, you might be unfamiliar with the publishing world, but one of the keys we have discovered is we actually have to publish the book for people to read them, which I actually thought made a lot of sense. So I gave up control of this book. But the reason it did take me so long is that I wanted to try to find out what it is about free speech that makes it indispensable. It's a curious thing. We all agree that free speech is indispensable, but not why. And we've been struggling so much with this. Now, the subtitle of the book is Free Speech in an Age of Rage. And it's not the age of rage, because this isn't our first. In many ways, This book is an unvarnished history of our struggle with free speech. It's the personalities and periods that help form our ideas of free speech. But in many ways, we're not as good as our advertising. That we have gone through periods of rage where we've turned on each other. We've arrested people by the thousands. Feminists, communists, socialists, unionists. Every time we did it, we were convinced we had a license, a right, an entitlement to do it. That's what rage does. The book talks about rage as a curious thing. You know, free speech is easier to behold at a distance. You know, if I talk about the McCarthy period, people are horrified. They say, how could we have allowed blacklisting, censorship to occur? But when I talk about the blacklisting and censorship today, they say, oh no, that's different. You know, we're fighting something new. We're fighting disinformation. Every generation thinks it has that license, but it's rage. Rage that gives them that certainty. And rage is all around us. No party has an exclusive on that. When I was covering the Trump impeachment, I remember coming out of the courtroom after the conviction and seeing people in the streets of New York dancing. It was just ecstasy. It was rage. See, what people don't want to admit is that they like it and they need it. Rage is contagious. It consumes everything about you. It allows you to do things and say things you would not ordinarily do or say. So it's in periods of rage is when we do the most harm to each other. The greatest danger of rage is not what I call rage rhetoric. This country was born in rage. That's what the Boston Tea Party was. But if you agree with the rage, it's righteous. And if you disagree with it, it's dangerous. But the greatest danger of rage is when the government takes rage rhetoric and turns it into state rage, where the government uses it to silence others. So this book sort of looks at why we grapple with it. And the title was actually taken from an opinion by Louis Brandeis. And Brandeis was one of the great civil libertarians ever to sit on the court. And he wrote this beautiful opinion, and he talked about how free speech is this indispensable right that it sustains all other rights. You can't have religious protections, the right of association, the press, without free speech. It is truly indispensable. It was a beautiful opinion that only Brandeis could have written. But the snapper was that at the end of the opinion, he concurred in the conviction of a woman, Charlotte Anita Whitney, who was a communist who was prosecuted because she spoke against lynching. So here you have this beautiful opinion talking about the indispensability of free speech, and it was every bit dispensable. He allowed her to go to jail. So did Oliver Wendell Holmes. The question is, how does someone so brilliant, someone who with Holmes could see a horizon that other people couldn't see in the law, how could those people not see what they were doing? The fact is, this book is a little bit different because it argues that free speech is a natural right. I'm a bit of a dinosaur in that sense. Most professors really poo-poo natural rights. They don't believe it exists. But I do. I believe this is one of them. I believe that free speech belongs to us as human beings, not by the grace of government, not as a privilege of those in power. It adheres to us to be fully human. We need it. And at the time of the revolution, there was this moment of clarity, this brief moment of clarity. See, the thing is, when you talk about the American Revolution, The most revolutionary act of the American Revolution was what we said about free speech. It was the greatest departure from Great Britain. There was no other part of the Constitution as significant as that. Great Britain never did support free speech, still doesn't. In fact, it's curious where it came from. I mean, suddenly, for the first time in the history of mankind, a government declared free speech as a right that belongs to individuals because they're human beings. It was an astonishing moment. No country has said those words since. It's still revolutionary. I have a colleague who's leading a movement to amend the First Amendment. She says that the First Amendment is, quote, aggressively individualistic. And she wants to introduce equity as the measure of whether free speech would be recognized. That's a popular view among law professors. But we lost this question of free speech in the Adams administration. We had this small, glorious window, and then it was gone. And they had a default to what I call a functionalist view of free speech. It's a view that you probably hear a lot from courts. It goes something like this, that we protect free speech because it's good for democracy. It perfects democracy. And it certainly does that, but it does so much more. You see, if you protect free speech because it's good for democracy, it means that some speech might not be as good. It means that there is high-value speech and low-value speech. It allows trade-offs. And once we got onto that slippery slope, it took us all the way to Whitney. It took us all the way to today, as we continually make these trade-offs as to what's good speech, what's bad speech. So the question is, what is free speech? When I teach it in my class, I show them this picture that many of you will recognize as a central panel from the Sistine Chapel. It's God creates Adam. It's beautiful. But Michelangelo's painting forces the viewer's attention to one part of the painting. It's sometimes called the touch. More of my colleagues in history have gotten PhDs off that picture. The touch. What is the touch? What was Michelangelo saying about that? Now, a lot of people say, it is the touch of life. After all, this is God creates Adam. So it's the spark of life. It's sort of odd, though, because Adam was there in the picture. What if it was something more? What if it was something perhaps even more profound? I came across an article in a rather forgotten journal by a medical professor. He's a neurologist. And he went to the Sistine Chapel, and he was admiring it, and he was leaving, and he then was leaving with his wife, and he said, wait. And he went back, and he said, do you see what I see? And she said, what? And he said, this. He said, behind God is the exact image of the human brain. I mean, not close to, it's exact. Is that just a coincidence? It's the exact outline. Now, we know that Michelangelo dissected bodies to help him make him a better artist. He knew what the human brain looked like. Is that just the world's greatest coincidence that God is featured over an outline of the human brain? The question is, what does that mean? Why would he do it? Now, one possibility is that it could be sort of a secular statement, right? Sticking the sort of finger in the eye of the Pope, saying that this is all about secularism. I guess it could be. What if it meant something else? And it gets us back to that. What if that means something else? When I teach free speech, I go around the class and I wait until I find some student doodling. It doesn't take long. And I stop and I say, are you doodling? And they'll absolutely panic. And they'll say, oh my God, I know, I was listening, I swear to God. And I said, no, I don't mind that. I love doodling. Everyone doodles. People doodle at weddings. They doodle at funerals. They doodle with goats in a boat. They doodle everywhere. And half the time we doodle and we don't even know it. We do these geometric shapes until they become blobs of ink. We don't even know what we were starting out to create. We just wanted to create it. There's something about humanity that demands creation. We are creators. What if that touch was God creating not just Adam, but a creator? What if that was the image of God that Adam was created in? He is the creator. And he made man a creator too. He gave human beings this intense desire to create, this need to project part of themselves in the world around us. It's insatiable, maybe insane. You know, you have the image of the starving artist. You know, Van Gogh didn't have money to eat. And finally, someone gave him a small amount of money. And you know what he did with it? He bought more canvas and paint. Now, the strongest impulse of a human being is to survive. But this man, who was in need of food, bought more canvas and paint. Why? Why is this overwhelming need that we have to be a creator? What the book explores is that studies indicate that we aren't just culturally or psychologically bound to create. We're physiologically bound to create. That studies have shown that when you cut people off, whether they're explorers in one study or prisoners in segregation, we physically change. The hippocampus actually shrinks. We physically become someone different. Perhaps that image of the brain reflects the greatest gift, that the divine touch was to give us a gift of divinity, to make us divine, make us creators. You know what's a strange thing is that we've done all these studies looking at DNA. And do you know, and I'm sure you know this already, that for the great apes, like chimpanzees, we have a 98.5 overlap with a great ape, like a chimpanzee. 98, over 98%. We have a 62% overlap with a fruit fly. And we have a 60% overlap with that. Now, does that make us talking bananas, sort of bananas 2.0? What's the difference between us and that? That's really what we're talking about. That needs things different from what we need. And what we need is part of being human. Now, we found that out in the world in very strange ways. We found it out from people like him. That's Phineas Gage. Now, many of you may remember that Phineas Gage was a railroad supervisor. And it fell to him to explode the rock face when they were putting down track. So they would drill a hole in the rock face, and then he would put explosives in it, and then he'd use a tamping iron. That tamping iron. To tamp down the explosives, put a wire in it, and be at a distance when it exploded. The problem is this day, Phineas was a bit sloppy. When he tamped it down too hard, and it sparked. And it blew that tamping iron right through his head. From under his chin, exited through his upper frontal lobe, out top of his head. Now, when the doctor, a wonderful doctor named Monroe, was asked to come, he was not in a particular hurry. He thought that this was a paperwork case. After all, Phineas Gage just had a tamping iron blown through his head. And he was astonished when he pulled up and found Phineas Gage not just talking, but doing notes in his notebook. And then he had an epiphany, perhaps one of the most brilliant epiphanies in history. He realized we don't know what the frontal lobe does. We don't know anything about it, except we know he doesn't have one, at least not a complete one. And it occurred to them that if we could figure out what he was like before the accident and what he's like now, maybe it would tell us what the frontal lobe does. And what he found was that Phineas Gage was described by his friends as becoming an animal. He had a hard time with relationships. He had a hard time even expressing himself in anything but the most rudimentary ways, but he had a very hard time with emotions. He couldn't speak to others. He couldn't seem to feel love. He was quick to anger, and person after person said that he acted like an animal. What was blown away somehow had made him less human. And we now know that that is where much of our abstract thought and speech comes from. So, this idea of free speech being something that is essential for humanity is a lesson from the people in this book. This book talks about all the personalities and periods that shaped our views. They're not all good. One of them is Charlotte Anita Whitney. She was an amazing figure. She's a hero. The fact is, our true heroes in free speech are all the people we hunted down. All the people like her who just wouldn't shut up. They're not John Adams, the greatest hypocrite ever to take office. He became everything that he fought against. He used the Alien and Sedition Acts to arrest his opponents. No, the true heroes are people like her. You know, she came from a wealthy family, a privileged family. They traced their lineage to 5 families on the Mayflower. Shows you the degree of inbreeding in this country. She was the niece of Justice Field. She used to spend summers with Justice Fields, one of the longest standing justices of the Supreme Court. And she went to Wellesley, where many privileged young ladies went. And they took a field trip to New York to a settlement. They were supposed to be there for 2 days. She stayed for 4 months. She had never seen such suffering. She had never seen such poverty, such hopelessness. And she wanted to do something about it. That's why I like her. I don't agree with her. She became one of the early American communists. She chose unwisely, but she chose for the right reason. She went to California. She fought for the right for women to vote, and she fought against lynching. And when she was about to give another anti-lynching speech, the police went to her to make sure she didn't have any question in her mind. If she gave that speech again, she'd be arrested. And to make sure she understood that, they put a police officer right behind her. And this, at that time, young woman, this product of American privilege, gave exactly that speech. And she defied the authorities. She allowed herself to be arrested. She defied the courts. She went all the way to the Supreme Court, where 2 of the greatest civil libertarians said that she should go to jail for it. You know, she is what George Bernard Shaw referred to. George Bernard Shaw said that unreasonable people believe the world should conform to them. And he said that's why all history is made by unreasonable people. I look out at this group and I see a lot of unreasonable people. Incredibly unreasonable people. Gloriously unreasonable people. Unreasonable people like her, who just won't shut up. Now, she believed that she had a right to speak because of those words. No one had ever written them before, and no one has written them since. It remains a revolutionary statement like none other in history. Even Lafayette, in the book that's about to come out, I talk a lot about Thomas Paine and the Marquis Lafayette. And when Lafayette went to France and helped write the Rights of Man, he tried to reproduce what the United States did in the First Amendment. He wrote something similar, not the same language. But where we put a period, he put a comma. And what followed was basically a clause that said, as long as it's in conformity with federal or national law, which of course gutted the whole meaning. Now, some people understood it for what it means. People like Hugo Black, who said, I take no law abridging to mean no law abridging. It seemed very straightforward to him. That clarity is what we lost. We lost them to people like John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. Now, Jefferson was better than Adams. Jefferson pardoned all of the people convicted under the Adams administration, but after all, they were all Jeffersonians. But then he prosecuted people for sedition. And sedition is an addiction that continues in our country. I argue in this book that we should eliminate all sedition crimes from the criminal code. And the reason is that sedition was created in England as a sort of alternative to treason. See, as enabling as the British judges were, they were sticklers, strangely enough, because they were awful in so many other respects. They gave the crown most everything it wanted. But when it came to convicting someone for treason because they made a bawdy joke about the Queen, they balked. They said, you know what, it doesn't fit the elements of treason. So the government created a new crime, sedition, a speech crime, and created a new tribunal, the Star Chamber. And the Star Chamber was a tribunal to try speech crimes, a secret tribunal. In the United States, we turned away from that tradition, and yet Adams brought it back. We started sedition prosecutions. We still have sedition on the books. But the biggest problem that we have is that we had this default to Blackstonian views that we protect free speech because of its function, because the government allows it, because it makes democracy better. And that is what brought us to where we are today. It brings us to where Oliver Wendell Holmes ended up, with the world's dumbest line about screaming fire in a crowded theater. That is the common refrain of the anti-free speech movement. You know, I had testified right before the release of the Twitter files in the House Judiciary Committee. And the Democratic members said, you know, Professor, you have no proof that the government is coordinating with these social media companies. And I said, I actually do have the proof. It's in my testimony. It's not complete because Twitter won't release their files. Facebook won't release their files. But we know it's there because we've seen these points of data that indicates that there's coordination between the Biden administration and these companies. Well, then the Twitter files were released. It's one of the reasons this book says that Elon Musk is the most consequential figure of free speech in our generation. And it blew away the narrative. And so the funny thing is, I was called again to the House Judiciary Committee not long after that, but after the release of the Twitter files. And it was like a switch had been flipped. Suddenly, the members were not denying that there was censorship or coordination. They were saying, of course there's coordination. We have to censor. And one of them, Dan Goldman from New York, said, you know, Professor, you know, Oliver Wendell Holmes said, when people cry fire in a crowded theater, we're allowed to do something, and the internet's one big crowded theater. And I said, you know, Congressman, you do realize where that's coming from, right? That's from the Schenck case, right? That's a case where they convicted a socialist for opposing the draft by passing around a flyer that quoted the U.S. Constitution. Is that the standard you want? Is that going to be the United States? That's our standard, to put that man in jail. Because Holmes walked away from it. And so did the Supreme Court. They abandoned Schenck and went to a case called Brandenburg. And Goldman cut me off and said, "Professor, we don't need a law lecture." And I suggest, I think you do. I think you do. Because you're the same guy. You're him. You're the same guy we have heard throughout these periods. You're making the same arguments. You're even using some of the same words. There's nothing new about you. We have faced you every one of these periods. You've been there. When we have been really afraid or really angry, you're the guy. You say that we can silence our neighbors. You know, Madison wrote in 1800 a wonderful essay, and in the middle of it he referred to sedition, speech prosecutions, as a monster. And I kept on reading that passage over and over again. Because it is. It's a monster that lives within us. We release it. When we're really angry or we're really afraid, we release it on each other. And we've never slayed it. It's still here. Now, the book actually talks about this painting. That when FDR gave his Four Freedoms speech, Norman Rockwell, the painter, wanted to paint it. It was right as the war was starting. And so he painted free speech first, and he came up with this, and a lot of people said, "What? We sort of expected you to do George Washington, the sun going over the Capitol. Who's that?" And he said, that's Jim Edgerton, that's my neighbor. And they're like, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah." Rockwell said, I went back to Vermont, and we were having a meeting in my small little hamlet, and we had decided that we would build a new school. And everyone was overjoyed. And then he stood up. And he said, "I'm a dairy farmer." He was actually the great-grandchild of a revolutionary hero. He's a small dairy farmer. He said, "I don't know if I'll make it to the end of the year." He said, "Most of you are dairy farmers. Most of us are in the same position. We can't pay our bills. I might have to sell my farm. How are we going to pay for this? Because I can't pay anything more. How are we going to pay for this?" And Rockwell was so struck by this that he said, that's free speech. Maybe it's harder to speak among friends and neighbors. Maybe that's when free speech counts the most. And so he painted that, and it became the bond poster for World War II. Because all of the people in D.C. that said, "What's that?" the American people didn't. They knew exactly what that was. They didn't have to know anything about Jim Edgerton. That's what was amazing about Rockwell. I love Rockwell. But many people didn't. When this painting came out, he was attacked because this was during the discovery of abstract art movement. And the person who attacked him almost on a weekly basis was the art editor of The New Yorker, a man by the name of Clement Goldberg. And Goldberg hated Rockwell's work. He was the guy who had discovered Jackson Pollock. And he would write one week about how Jackson Pollock in modern art's the future of art, and the next week he would savage Norman Rockwell. He said, that's an artist that doesn't want to be taken seriously. He called it kitsch. He said, that's a cartoon. Rockwell was the most popular painter in the country. But he didn't say anything. He never did. He didn't respond to people, to critics, until he did. He responded what may be the single most devastating rebuttal in the history of the English language, and he didn't say a word. He painted that. It's called The Connoisseur, and there was no mystery what he was conveying with it. It's a figure, it's a very large piece of art, and it's a large piece of abstract art, and in front of it you see a well-dressed man, And you get the feeling he's been there a while. He has an art catalog clenched tightly in his hands. You can't see his face, but you get the feeling he's been staring at it for a while, trying to find meaning. And that was his answer to Clement Goldberg. Now, when that was unveiled, in the audience was perhaps the most famous abstract painter other than Picasso at the time, de Kooning. And de Kooning exclaimed, "My God, that's better than Jackson Pollock." And he was so overwhelmed, he made them get a magnifying glass and brought him up and said, "This is the finest abstract piece I have seen in years." The fact is that Rockwell could do that. Rockwell went to the best art schools in the country. He actually has a wide portfolio of art that is different from what his style became. Every different style he did was magnificent. He was an unbelievably talented and versatile artist. But he turned to this style, and he later explained that he would go through the United States, and he realized that he would see things that other people didn't see. He would see profound things that people would walk by, and he wanted to paint them. He wanted to capture them. And they were little vignettes of who Americans are. A cop sitting at a soda stand with a young boy, an umpire yelling at a manager at a baseball plate. He was seeing in those things something that meant something more profound than what they were just capturing in the moment. And the interesting thing is that the American people didn't view them as kitsch at all. They didn't view them as simplistic. They viewed them as incredibly profound. They understood that he was talking about something else. He wasn't talking about a police officer sitting with a young boy. He was capturing something between them, something transcendental. And that's why they loved him. But the fact is, the law has its own connoisseurs, constitutional connoisseurs. I am, admittedly, Rockwellian when it comes to the Constitution. I think the First Amendment means exactly what it says, and I don't think it's simple at all. I think it's incredibly profound, and it's the story of a people. It's a story of our people. But you have law professors who are sort of the constitutional connoisseurs, and they say, look, the First Amendment can't be that simple. Turley and others are just choosing not to be taken seriously. This is sort of constitutional kitsch. And they say, you have to translate it. It's nuanced. You can't just support so much speech. When my book came out, 4 anti-free speech books came out from law professors. One at the University of Michigan said that the First Amendment was the Achilles heel of America. Rather than the thing that defines us, it's the thing she believed that was an existential threat. We have now the greatest anti-free speech movement in our history. It's not the first, but we've never seen anything like this one. We've never seen this alliance between corporations, the media, academia, and the government. Never before. 2 of those are areas that usually defend free speech. And they were winning. Before Musk released the Twitter files, they were winning. They have won in Europe in a way that I never thought possible. Free speech is in a free fall in Europe. I just got back about a week and a half ago from Berlin, where I was speaking at the World Forum. And I was one of just 2 pro-free speech speakers. The other one is an old acquaintance of yours, Nadine Straussen. And Nadine and I had never seen a greater collection of anti-free speech figures or groups. They were all gathering in Berlin in response to Vance's Munich speech, where he defended free speech. And they called as the headliners Bill and Hillary Clinton. And Hillary Clinton is the figure who, when Musk bought Twitter, she went to the EU and said, use the Digital Services Act to force him to censor American citizens. And they did exactly that. They told Musk that he had to comply with their standards. When Musk interviewed President Trump, at that point, former President Trump, he got a letter from the EU saying, we're watching you. And if that interview involves disinformation, we could prosecute you. This is Musk interviewing the past President of the United States and who would become the future President of the United States in a presidential campaign in the United States. And the Digital Services Act, they claimed, reached into our country. That's why I supported what Vance did. But what I saw in Berlin was chilling. You know, in Germany, France, England, it's all in a free fall. I met with free speech groups after my speech. They're all on the ropes. That tide is reaching our shores. Don't make any mistake about it. We have our own anti-free speech movement. It's coming from higher education. It's metastasized in our own system. And this is it. We have to fight it here, and we have to fight it now. And we have to win. Because the people on the other side are as committed as they have ever been. So the question is, where do we go from here? And the answer is buy the darn book and find out. No. They already bought the book. I'll tell you. You know, when I was in Colorado, I was shocked recently because a woman came up to me and said, I'm looking forward to your speech. I just finished your book, and I really liked it. And I said, well, that's great. And she says, but could you tonight say something positive? And I said, what? I thought my book was positive. And she went, meh. And I felt like Woody Allen. They once told Woody Allen, can you end your speech with something positive? And Woody Allen said, I don't do positive. He said, could I give you 2 negatives to make a positive? So maybe I'll give you 2 negatives to make a positive. The first negative is this. It's not working. That's what I told him in Berlin. I said, how is it going for you here in Germany? How's it working? You've been at this a long time. You have one of the most extensive censorship systems in the history of the world. You started by saying you were going to censor Nazis, and now you're censoring every group. Anyone who insults another group. Anyone who says something bad about Islam or homosexuality or other groups. You're arresting them all. How is it working for you? Because the last time I checked, the neo-Nazi movement was flourishing. You had thousands of skinheads marching through your cities. You haven't even made a dent. But you know what you did do? A recent poll in Germany found that only 17% of Germans feel comfortable speaking publicly about their values. 17%. You silenced the wrong people. Maybe that was your choice all along, because this has always been about power, controlling what people say about you in the government, in the EU. But it's not working. You know, I had a debate recently with one of the heads of the Meta's censorship board, and I asked him the same question. How is it working? The fact is, this book shows that in the history of humanity, not a single censorship system has ever succeeded. It has a total failure rate. It has never stopped a single idea or a single movement. It's a total failure. At Meta, they even ran this creepy campaign appealing to young people, like some of them back there. They tried to get young people to embrace censorship, which they use an Orwellian term of content moderation. But it didn't work. It moved the needle a little bit, but it didn't work. They're very surprised about the younger generation. They didn't turn out to be who they hoped they would be. It's very hard to get a free people to give up freedom. So let's go on to the second negative. This isn't going to be our last age of rage. We are going to release that monster again. And we're going to harm each other because we think we have a right to do it. You know, we always hear about Pandora's box, which was really a jar. But you know, a lot of people don't realize Pandora was created. She was invented by Zeus. Zeus was pretty darn angry because Prometheus had given fire to humanity, and that uniquely ticked him off. He ends up chaining Prometheus to the side of a mountain and having eagles peck his liver out. But he wasn't done with humanity, not by a long shot. He created her, a perfect human, an irresistible human, Pandora. She may be the first true femme fatale. And he sent her to humanity with a jar filled with everything that we do to each other. Greed and envy and hatred and pain and hunger and poverty and war and death. It's like a catalog of human history. And she proved to be too human. She wasn't supposed to open the jar. But she did. We're always going to open the jar. We're human. And we're going to let out all of those things that we shouldn't allow. But what people often don't talk about in this story is the thing that came out last. The thing that Zeus didn't want more than anything else to be released to humanity. The last thing to leave the jar was hope. And I could see why Zeus wanted that to escape least of all. The fact is, what makes us human are not all of those things that we did to each other and do to each other and will do again to each other. It's the fact that every one of us believes down deep that we have the ability to transcend who we are and to be something greater. We have hope. So when people say, are you optimistic about free speech? The answer is yes. Because if you believe that free speech is a natural right, you can't kill free speech without killing us. It has a way of finding out like water. So the fact is, the rage doesn't define us as a people. Free speech defines us as a people. And hope defines us as a people. Thank you very much.